Welcome to the Catalyst Conversations podcast, presented to you by Berkeley Women in Business, or BWIB for short. Striving to create community, foster empowerment, and cultivate professionalism. We're your hosts, Shalini.
And I'm Shree. Thank you, Ramin, for producing this episode. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Bonnie Morris, a leading figure in women's history. Dr. Bonnie Morris, thank you for joining us. My name is Shree. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Bonnie Morris. I'm a lecturer in the history department. I'm in my 7th year here at Cal, give or take the COVID year. And I teach many of the classes for the undergraduate history major and the American Cultures program, including the popular sports history class, LGBT history, women in war.
Very exciting. So that's all wonderful. Let's get started with your journey. So we want to know what initially sparked your passion for women's rights and gender equality.
Well, I came of age during the second wave of American feminism. I was born in 1961, so by the time I was 10, I had lived through much of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and then feminism was a natural progression. I also went to a wonderful alternative Quaker school that offered women's studies from age 10 on. So I had it in middle school and upper school. And I began reading Ms. Magazine when I was 11 in the school library. And my first women's studies class that I took when I was 12 was really with a serious scholarly approach and older high school girls. I was the baby of the group. We did a dramatic reading of the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, and I had to do like a 20-page paper, so it was very good preparation. And in the later 70s, I became involved with organizing for the Equal Rights Amendment, which we still don't have. And in college, I became the first student at my university to graduate with the Women's Studies minor. Yeah.
That's very impressive. Yeah. So kind of similar to that, as someone who's so deeply immersed in women's history, what do you think are the most pressing issues facing women today?
I think the rolling back of abortion rights is sickening. I have been defending abortion rights my entire life. I think, though, that a lot of women would say right now national security is a women's issue with so many women refugees. I think that obviously the distressing remarks by former President Trump about the freedom to grab a woman by the genitalia is a reminder that we have disrespect for women at the highest levels in governance, and we have still not defeated the issues of rape and domestic violence, although we're better informed. I would say that for a lot of younger women, the issues continue to be self-image, body size, concern about dieting, and that's magnified by the projection of an image on social media and the presentation of a self for employment, popularity, maintaining so many accounts as a socially visible person. And I think as a women's sports historian, it's obvious that there's a disparity in salary for athletes, and I'm very happy with what women's soccer has done to push equality in pay. That doesn't necessarily mean we see opportunities for professional women athletes at the same level as men's. Finally, I think that we're seeing in states like Florida and beyond, there's a suppression of teaching about the history of women of color. There's a fear of the sexuality that comes with women's history, and many books are being banned. And everything I took for granted in the freewheeling 70s, 80s, and 90s is now moving backward. So as a historian, I have plenty to do, but I feel for people coming of age now.
That was a beautiful holistic answer. You covered almost everything. I'm very impressed. And obviously, I mean, you have such a wonderful history and view of everything, and you've been able to witness all of the recent ages of the recent feminist or the whole feminist movement, I feel like. And so based on that, you've written several very influential books, such as The Feminist Revolution and Women's History for Beginners. So could you share what inspired you to write these books and
Yes.
the impact that you hope they have?
Yeah, I really have liked every book I've done. I also did one called Revenge of the Women's Studies Professor, which was like a humorous look at what's it like teaching women's history. Um, well, I wrote Women's History for Beginners because I saw in, when more popular a little while ago, bookstores, the series that was put out by that particular press. It was Economics for Beginners, Freud for Beginners. And I thought, oh, I'll propose doing Women's History for Beginners because there's no reason for people to feel afraid, and not everybody gets to take a college level class. And I'll kind of lay out, why don't we get more in the high school? Why don't we get more in middle school? Why do so many people arrive at college only knowing the year women got the vote and nothing else? I had a wonderful illustrator, and I was able to look at who are the unknown figures in American history. Why is so much of women's history about the body? And then I was invited to do the book, The Feminist Revolution, by a publisher in England, and I wrote part of it, and then I had a partner who wrote some chapters based on women in the history in England. That was terrific because that was meant to be a big coffee table book from the Smithsonian. And I actually had the pleasure of going and doing a book signing at the Smithsonian in Women's History Month a couple years ago. And I sat at a big table, and there was a woman who came up to me and was like, "Do you hate man? Do you want to destroy the family?" Because that's what I think of when I think of feminism. And I was like, well, do you want to see women run for office and be elected? Do you believe in equal pay for equal work? Does your daughter play sports? These are issues that I believe in strongly. And she was sort of like, ow. But you really have to keep your cool. When you are an author of this kind of literature, of course there are going to be people who actually write mean email. And I would say I get more fan mail than hate mail. And the best was after the Women's History for Beginners book, I got the chance to leave a copy of it at the White House, and I got a fan letter from First Lady Michelle Obama.
Wow. Wow.
I know. I thought I was being arrested or something. A big envelope that said White House, and I thought,
Did I do something
what
wrong?
documents, And this was my effort to get the book and the material to the first daughters.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is a long shot, but it appears that it was well received by the first family. And that was such a thrill. And, on the same, I think I appeared on C-SPAN doing a reading. So the same book generated, a lovely letter from Michelle Obama, but I also had a guy call in while I was on C-SPAN and tell me I was going to burn in hell. And, you just keep your face neutral on those occasions.
People really miss
you learn to be gracious and, whatever.
Now, speaking more about, your academic journey, you've not only done all this amazing work, outside of the university and had so many amazing experiences, but even within the university, you've introduced courses like sports and gender in U.S. history, and I personally think that's so impressive. And I just want to know a little bit more about what motivated you to, start this course and why it's important for students to learn about
It's been so popular here, and it's been my pleasure to have Olympians and, a tennis pro and a synchronized swimming star and someone from the Canadian women's water polo team. Well, I started it 26 years ago. I was a professor at George Washington University, and I was very struck by how well the women's basketball team was doing and how few people went to their games. Mm-hmm. And I went to a kind of double game where they had a men's game and then the women's game all in one afternoon. And President Clinton at the time came to that game and brought his daughter Chelsea. And they watched the men's game, and then they got up to leave when the women's game began. And I actually confronted President Clinton and said, please sit back down. Are you insane? I didn't use that language. But I said, you can't get up and leave now that the women have taken the court in front of your daughter and all the women of America. That is a terrible example. I'm a women's studies professor here. Please watch the women you're representing Title IX law and equal opportunity, and you have a 14-year-old, and the women's seems better than the men's, and what does it say when the president walks out on them? And he went and sat back down.
Wow.
So I gave a direct order to the president, and that ended up in several books, that scene.
Very
Wow.
cool.
But it inspired me. Like, we don't even have a place to talk about this disregard for women's achievement and how it really comes from the highest level. And I petitioned my chair, like, well, what if I, design a class? Because I believe if you raise a problem, you should be willing to solve it too, be part of the solution. So I said, I'll design the class. We need a dedicated scholarly space to talk about men's and women's sports. And it has been a massive success, and I've taught it almost every semester for all these years at very different schools. So I taught it at GW, Georgetown, American University, semester at C, out here at St. Mary's, Berkeley, Santa Clara. It was easily adapted to either a small class, now 275. I've had, in the early years, mostly athletes and women's studies people, but now it's satisfies the American cultures requirement. So I get a lot of people who are in the engineering school who desperately need a humanities class. And then I get a lot of international students who will say, please add me. We have nothing like this at home. You must, let me in. And I've had every kind of student from all over the world. On semester at C, which is a shipboard college program that takes about 600 students and faculty to 10 countries, I adapted it with an international focus and went to men's and women's games in, a dozen countries. And that was super.
Wow.
Cane ball in Myanmar and playing soccer in Ghana. And my goodness, I made this soccer ball for charity and for visibility of women's games in Ghana.
That's amazing. And like all this involvement you've had within like academia to sort of promote like the class and just further like knowledge about that whole subject. I also wanted to know, after seeing your involvement in projects outside of academia, such as consulting for the Smithsonian and whatnot, how that highlights the intersection of women's history with broader cultural contexts.
Well,
so I'd love to know how you see this work contributing to raising awareness about gender issues.
I'm just bringing out a handful of quarters. I'm on the advisory board of the National Women's History Museum, which is still virtual, but has exhibits in the Martin Luther King Jr. Library in Washington, D.C. now. And we worked on the Women on Quarters program, which with the U.S. Mint and the Smithsonian, put a diverse group of women on quarters, 5 a year for several years. We have Wilma Mankiller, I'm reading upside down, Bessie Smith, Anna Mae Wong, Sally Ride. The interesting thing about the quarters program is that we got all kinds of women to choose from, and it was a very difficult, from thousands down to 4 or 5, and there was a lot of dissent with the different people consulting. But in each instance, the circulation of the coins has been widespread, and I have gotten coins with women on them in, on my way to Mammoth Lakes in a tiny little town in the mountains, and from the gas station, my bank, the gym, and I'll stop people and say, "See that quarter? I help with that," and it's just been a way of getting people to talk about, well, who are these women? And, 1 or 2 are lesbians. I'm very proud of that. I think it's important to, be out and proud and to have that history also part of women's history. But we've had a lot of diversity, and I think it's been something that is a real material example of women's history for the everyday. But I also worked as a consultant at Disney Animation, trying to get more women's history in film. And I work as the archivist for Olivia Records, which is the longest women's recording company I'm going to do a women's music talk at the Women's Faculty Club on campus, March 19th. I think I've also been part of the College Board AP U.S. History exam for almost 22 years. I'm working now with their effort to do, African American history. But a number of young high school students regularly email me with their petition to get women's history into the AP. And
that'd be a really cool class.
It's so needed, but considering the contentious backlash right now,
yeah.
I've seen lots of questions on women's history, and some of them I wrote myself. So we do have a DBQ on second wave feminism and so on. But anyway, I've done all of these things, and they've been terrific, and I've worked with beautiful colleagues and wonderful people all the time.
That is so impressive. Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. And throughout your career, you have, worked with so many different people, and especially you've had the opportunity to teach so many different students at all these different colleges and semester at sea. So I was just wondering if there was a specific instance or favorite moment that you had with the student or impactful.
Wow. There have been so many highlights. An amazing experience I had on semester at sea was that I got to meet Fidel Castro and argue about women's history with the dictator, and he's gone now, and that'll never happen again. But we heard him speak, and then as visiting faculty guests, we all had mojitos with him, and in my D+ Spanish, I argued about with women around the world, would it be a more peaceful place, and that was mind-bending. Seeing that in so many places it's still difficult for women simply to go out without being judged as licentious or dishonored, and how much easier it is for men to get access to education. That was very moving for me. I was able to take my women's studies class to the feminist bookstore in Bangalore in India, and that was fantastic. The Sri Lekha bookstore. And that was a wonderful encounter. And we also met with many women authors and editors. Another very wonderful experience was helping a group of women who had created a small business loan challenge that they could get 25 women to build a house in 25 days for homeless women in India. And they did. And they won the money, and they were having a huge party when we arrived. And I was whirled into the middle of a group of women and danced all night long to celebrate what that would mean for the construction of further homes. That was just so moving and terrific. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Going back, I wanted to know a little bit more about your experience advocating for women's history within your consulting for Disney and for College Board. I'm really interested in hearing more about.
Oh man, well, I signed a non-disclosure act with Disney Animation, but I can tell you that I did a series of at the time Skypes before Zoom, and what they were interested in was learning more about women's sports history and how that could be used in future projects. And they were, interested in strengthening, that there are so many characters in Disney films who naturally show women's ability. Mulan is a great example, to be a young warrior, or to problem solve, or to be not just rescued, but the rescuer. And in the end, I went down and visited and was shown the History of Animation museum there, and was able to tour the animation that had been done by one of the few women art animators earlier in the 20th century, and she had done the work for Alice in Wonderland. For the College Board, I began as a reader, and then I became an exam leader, question leader, whatever. It was a sort of series of promotions where you basically set the standards, like this is a 9, this is an 8, or how you decide which one's better than the next. I could tell you that some of the attitudes of some men was, why do we have to have this women's history? And I was shocked because there wasn't the same open questioning. Why do we have to have, Martin Luther King, history? It was still seen as ideological or radical to have basic information about women in America. And we had lots of evening discussions about that. The answers some students provided were pretty funny, but well-meaning. So I did a presentation of one of my books and what are some best practices on how we study women's history. So both there and in the book I did, Women's History for Beginners, the key issue, which we see now all over the U.S., is a lot of women's history is really about the body and intimate material, virginity, fertility, rape. How do you make that age appropriate? How do you make women's history work for kindergarten through middle school? Well, obviously you can have famous women who were important and helpful, whether it's Rosa Parks or inventors. You can look at what were the objects women used to run a home or go to school in the olden days and how women survived in wartime and with difficult conditions. You can look at how women survive poverty and slavery and rise to be able to help other women get an education. I think something a lot of people don't know is that it was nuns running small Catholic women's colleges who introduced women's history classes in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. And some of the first women's studies courses were taught by, Sister so-and-so. I think that there's room to bring in women's history to younger women in the way it shaped me. I took women's history in 7th grade and I did a 20-page paper on Florence Nightingale. That was all very mainstream, and we learned how women got the vote, and women's health issues, which are always collapsed into birth control and abortion, can really be shifted in the younger grades to sports. What's the history of women being not allowed to run and jump, and how did corsets constrict women's health, and what's it like to be able to wear sneakers? And you can do all of that with a G rating. And I think you can also introduce media literacy at an early age and encourage girls, don't believe you have to always look like a perfect fairy princess. What are some strong looking women of the past, and what did they do? Who was Joan of Arc, and what about women who had to help in the American Revolution? And where do we go from that level to making more meaningful literature available in libraries and studies for people who want to get a scholarship to college in women's history?
Amazing. That's awesome. And I'm also looking to know, looking back on your own journey, what advice would you give to your younger self, knowing that you know more about academia and advocacy for women's rights?
Wow. Well, let me shift that. If I were to give advice to any younger woman, it's keep a journal, because I started keeping one when I was 12. I'm now on volume 206, and I look back through my entire career. I can look at everything that happened to me for 50 years. Oh my God!
Do you keep a handwritten journal?
Yeah, wow. Ink on my fingers even now. And I think that's one of the best way to get any frustration out of your body. Keep a record of what's going on at work or your plans, ambitions, outline. But if I looked back at my younger self, I didn't get enough instruction in grad school about how to navigate academia. I didn't know, really how to navigate applying for a tenure track position or money, I would say, what to expect in terms of salary and benefits. I feel like that's something younger people now are, like you in the business school, are far more savvy. I was issue driven and not income driven. I was not concerned with earning a lot. I wanted to do something important, and, I had my head in the clouds in that way. I would probably be more alert to media opportunities, because that's become so important. And I did do well with promoting myself or my image or being comfortable on camera because I did a lot of acting. And I was in lots of musicals, and I wanted to be a Broadway actress for a long time. So at the point at which it became important to do interviews or to do your, YouTube material in an enthusiastic way, that is no different than being ready to go in front of a classroom and make people care. And, on a rainy day like this, I had to go in today and go, yeah, we're going to look at gender roles in the 1950s. How's everybody doing? And you're like a host. But there's people who are in academia who just don't love teaching, or they don't love it the way I do. So I think it's a personality thing. I would probably, going back in time, be probably more open to interviewing women from different walks of life for some of the research I did. What do I mean by that? I think that coming out of a peace movement background in a Quaker school, I was less tuned in to the importance of women in the military and their experiences and how they have navigated harassment. And I would have interviewed the wax, waves, and wasps while they were still alive. I regret not doing that, but later I developed a Women in War class, and I was able to meet some terrific wax and wasps.
Thank you so much for all of your amazing insights and experiences. I think we definitely learned a lot today, and your commitment to, gender equity and your research in women's history is truly amazing.
Can I add two things?
Yes, of course.
I want to say something about the wonderful men who take women's history. I feel very compelled to say women's history is for everyone. The fear people have had that, it's taught by, man-hating ideologues. I've always had guys.
Pseudo-feminism.
Yeah, in my classes, and they've always been dynamic. I was very fortunate to teach the Crown Prince of Jordan, Hussein Abdullah, who took my class at Georgetown and will be king of Jordan one day.
Wow.
When I see the negotiation right now between President Biden and King Abdullah, and I think of the impact I might have had as a women's studies mentor to the next generation, I can say with complete transparency that he wrote a beautiful paper on the right of women to an education, and he will be a great world leader. And to have interaction like that with both men and women who will shape the future, to have so many returning football players in my classes, and to hear from guys who have graduated who write back to me and say, your class changed my life. That is a great feeling, and it's a giant range of people from every kind of background. I taught Ellen DeGeneres' cousin. He showed up in a feminist theory class, and he did a great, paper and talked about what it was like to see, his relative on TV. And so for a lot of people, it's a safe space to address what's going on in their lives and their future. And quickly, I think my students relax and realize that I'm nice and not out to get them, and
with your pitchforks,
not out to flunk anybody. I would say I was surprised by how stressful Berkeley is in terms of a fast-paced, demanding school, and that the stereotype out there of hippies on the lawn with guitars is inaccurate. Everybody I know is just studying and eating takeout with a book propped in front of them. And all I can do is make my time with students as relaxed and enjoyable, as well as bracing intellectually as possible. But I have an investment in clarifying that this is indeed a credible field of study with high standards. And if you come in thinking this is your easy class and you're going to snore through getting an A, think again. But I think for a lot of people, there's anxiety because they've never taken women's history and they don't know how to do well. Like, well, it's like any other class. You write papers and you read the books. But writing about the body, I think, is intimidating for some people, and writing about the history of reproduction. And it's no different than your first zoology class, or, there's going to be nitty-gritty material, and it's painful. People go home, it's painful looking at what's been done to women. but we also look at what's been done to men in slavery and in every kind of situation. It's an intimate academic field, but it is with us to stay. So I'm happy to be from an earlier generation that was able to do a doctorate at one of the only schools where you could do a PhD in women's history at the time, Binghamton. And we all did well, my classmates are at Columbia and Georgetown and so on. And we're all doing it. And we came up with demanding mentors. So I'm very grateful to your kind attention and your supportive inquiry into what I do. And, you're beautiful young women. You will go far.
Thank you.
I hope that business will be a great field for you, and that we'll see more women making the decisions, especially behind what we eat, drink, and think.
Yeah, and as you said, like, I think women's history is so important in every field, and
Yeah.
I think it's very important, especially in business, and that's like kind of what we're trying to do at BWIB, to like bring more awareness to women, and like you said, it's not just like a woman's issue, it's like a man's issue as well.
I have one good line for critical, super conservative men who, say women's history, and I'm like, so you have no value for your mother's story, the history of the women in your family, who your foremothers were, how they shaped you, how they shaped culture, how they shaped your survival. You're not interested in the history of motherhood. You're not interested in the history of childcare. You're not interested in the history of the traditional values you espouse, which were spearheaded and supported by women. And we even look at the language for that, the distaff side of the family, the women who, even when they relaxed by the fireside, were spinning the family's clothes. There's objects, images, history for everything about that. Why does it threaten you?
Yeah. Your perspective is so inspiring, and we loved hearing everything you had to say. Definitely, everyone listening is going to learn so much and hear so many interesting anecdotes about, confronting Bill Clinton at a basketball game.
I became the first president to phone in his congratulations to the winning women's NCAA team that year. So I think
instant impact.
Something to do with that, and I feel I've been able to interact with several world leaders, which is just whack, and
it's incredible.
It's a right place, right time.
Many people hope to make half an impact as you have.
I have lots more to do. During the pandemic, I wrote 4 different books, and 2 of them are in print now. But I want to, I did a book on teaching women's sports here at Cal called "What's the Score?" That's doing well. But I also, have much more to do, and I seem to have plenty of energy left.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing whatever you come up with, because it sounds incredible.
Just hang on to your own dreams. It's not that hard to do what you love. You can find a way
to make such a big impact, and in this manner is really inspiring. And I hope any students that are listening are inspired to take your course or look into,
I love it here. I'm so lucky to be here. I never for a minute take for granted the privilege of teaching at Berkeley. This is a really good school, and I have done school my whole life. I went right through, like mommy and me, at age 2 to preschool, and and right into grad school and right into teaching. And it was really hard that year that everything was closed not to be on campus and in a classroom. I mean, I finished classes online, but I'm really comfortable with education, and I am just so impressed with the level of ability of the students that Berkeley attracts.
Thank you.
All the smart kids are in the playpen together, and it is so fun.
It's so fun.
It's stressful, but wouldn't you say it's fun?
You grow so much.
Oh,
it is fun.
My God. And just, play with your mind.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
And thank you to everyone for listening to our 3rd episode.
Thank you, Tech People.
Fast Catalyst Conversations. Thank you for joining us.